The first video game that I really fell in love with as a kid was The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, and so I thought for this week it would be fun to recreate the Master Swords platform in the Lost Woods from that game, and so that's what we're going to do this week. I knew that I wanted this to be tabletop scale, so the first thing I did was cut out a 28mm Zelda. Just been informed by my legal team that I shouldn't even say that as a joke. Now with my 28mm Hero of Hyrule, I was ready to move on to the Little Master Sword. I used a paperclip to make a little armature, and then I was going to sculpt it out of green stuff, which I had never done before, but I'm pretty pleased with how it turned out, all things considered. I also tried to make a squirrel, which is not as good. I'll show you that at the very end of this video, but here's a close-up of the Master Sword, not bad for a first attempt. I then hit with a white primer and some base colors, some blue, some red, some blade steel. And I know all the real Zelda fans out there are saying, Zach, the Master Sword in A Link to the Past isn't blue like this, it's mostly silver and red. To which I have to say, shut up, nerd. Just kidding, we're all nerds here. I just thought the blue one was more interesting. And with the sword complete, it was time for me to move on to the base. This piece of foam that I had wasn't wide enough, so I had to cut another piece and glue it on. Then it was time to fill this big ass crack that I created using some spackling paste. I just filled it, wiped it down smooth and then sanded it flat. Although I didn't sand it very flat, look at that. But next I coated it with Mod Podge and then gave it a nice brown top coat. I've upgraded from the dollar store brown that I used in my last video to a burnt umber from Blick Art Supply. As that dried, I began working on the trees. I stole this tree idea from Frankie D. Crafter on YouTube. I will link to him in the bio. I think these trees really emulate that Lost Wood feel of A Link to the Past. But there are a lot of steps to get to that point. So the first thing we're going to do is take some Sculptamold and form it around the balloons to make the tree shapes. This is what one of those will look like. I have to make 7. I had a lot of problems with the Sculptamold because it was drying very quickly and crumbling and not working. So I looked at the box and it turns out this stuff can expire. This box was very expired. Then I saw a Reddit post where a guy said that he used a 20-year-old box of Sculptamold just fine, which meant it was me that was making the mistake. And my mistake was I wasn't putting in enough water. I guess what I thought the consistency of cottage cheese was wrong. Then it was onto the pedestal. I cut it out of dollar store foam, and then using the first shape I traced, and then I cut, pro game remove, the 3 squares that would make up the base. Then I threw some tacky glue on that guy, glued them all together, and put them under some weight to allow it to dry properly. As that dried, I began working on the little rock pedestal that actually holds the sword. I followed a similar routine with this, except for I used hot glue instead of tacky glue so it would dry faster. Then with a little bit of an experiment, I used the spackling paste to coat the whole thing to give it more of a rocky texture, and I sanded that down until it looked like smooth stone. Then I covered that baby in Mod Podge. I used this guy as a guide and I added grid lines to the base. And everybody knows that this platform has rounded edges, so I had to cut off the corners. And while humming Bo Burnham, which I would be doing for the entirety of this project, because that special is so good. If you haven't seen it, watch it. It's on Netflix. What are you doing? I cut out the stairs to the top of the platform. And then using the stair cutout pieces, I cut out these little things that I would use to round the edges. I guess you could call it a lip. And then here's a look at what we've done so far. Not bad. And then once again returning to the spackling paste, I cover up all the grid lines that I painstakingly measured out. And I also iced this baby like a cake. One of my biggest concerns for this project is that I'm relying very heavily on this spackling paste, and I'm not using it the way it's supposed to be used. It's supposed to just fill holes, but I'm using it kind of to model and sculpt the rocks and stuff, and I don't know if that's going to work. I don't know if it'll dry hard enough. It's kind of brittle, but I think maybe if it dries, I sand it down, I coat it in Mod Podge, it should be fine, but I don't know, so... Thanks, Zach. Once that dried, I began sanding it down, and this really allowed me to get some rounded edges and smooth stone look, which I really love. Okay, so I was going to write subscribe in the dust and then vacuum it up, but I straight up forgot to write subscribe in the dust, so just imagine that's what it says. And I covered all that spackling paste in black Mod Podge to protect it a little bit and allow it to be painted. And I realized that these should be rounded, so I just snipped these little guys off, just like that. And then it was time to de-balloon the trees. Why did so much shit go everywhere? Well, I thought I was in the clear as far as like shouldn't breathe in goes, but guess I'm not. With the lungs filled with plaster, I began coating these guys with black Mod Podge. I went a little bit off recipe here and did the Mod Podge before the oats, which you'll see a little bit later on was probably a good move. With that, I was onto the railings. I marked and then cut some dowel rods, sanded them down, etched little railing things into them, and then hot glued everything down, baby. Look at that. Ooh, hoo, hoo. I honestly don't know why I decided to use that voice there, but I just wanted to say that I'm sorry. Anyway, I covered this in Mod Podge. Get used to that step, it happens a lot. Then I began cutting out some foam bricks. I used a jar of coins to smooth out the edges. I glued those suckers on along the base, and then I dry fit the Master Sword just to make sure everything is coming up rainbows. Another black Mod Podge, and I began to paint this thing. I should have watered this down. You can see the brush strokes and everything. Amateur move, but learned my lesson by the gray. Now on the real thing, this blue bit is a little more ornate, but I decided just to do a straight line. Call it an artistic decision. So here it is with the base coat. It's a little lighter than I want, but I think once I put a wash on it, it'll be fine. But the big move right now is I have to put in the 4 diamonds, and I tried to freehand it last night, and it was a disaster. So I think I'm gonna make a little stencil and stencil them on and see how that goes, and then I will do a matte top coat, which I'm very nervous about because I do not have good luck. Also, then I have to figure out how I'm going to put the writing on it. I think I'm just gonna do little squiggly lines. Printed me out some stencils on some cardstock, cut them out, and then I tackied them down. Tackied? I used blue tack. First one, not so good, so I tried it again without the blue tack, and that one was worse somehow. So then I tried it with a sponge, and that was the worst one. So I decided the best move was probably just to use the stencil as like a guide, and then freehand the diamonds in. And then use the gray to sort of clean up that freehand, and I'm pretty pleased with the way that turned out. Next it was time for the squiggles. I used this Faber-Castell pen to draw these squiggles, and I gotta say, these are some professional squiggles if I've ever seen professional squiggles. And it was outside for the scariest, most nerve-wracking part, the top coat, and gotta say, it ended up working out just fine, which was wonderful because I was very nervous. Cracked open a cold one, in celebration of it turning out so nice, and by nice I mean it just wasn't ruined. Added a black wash to this, dabbed some of it up with a paper towel to make it look extra crisp. Added some dry brushing, bring out those highlights and the stairs and the bricks. Then I add some green flocking to add a little bit of extra detail. You know, it's ancient, it's been in the woods, there should be some greenery. Then it was stump time. So it turns out that this little saw on my Leatherman is like light years better than this big ass stupid one. I cut and sanded all 7 trunks of the trees and then used hot glue to make the bark texture. And then it was time to oat up these babies. This part wasn't that much fun, adding glue and oats and making a mess. Then big shocker here, I added another coat of black Mod Podge on top of the oats, and then used a white to dry brush onto the leaves and to the trunks. This will create some highlights when we go to paint. I then laid out the trunks and the treetops to see where everything would come into place before I hot glued down the trunks. And this is where that extra layer of black Mod Podge really came in clutch. Nothing was broken, thanks to the indestructible nature of Mod Podge. Glued everything down, then I used hot glue to make some roots. Then I used hot glue again to glue down the base. I wish I would have used a glue that had a longer set time than hot glue, but no worries, we're learning, we're earning, we're doing it all. Followed that up by gluing down some oats, which will be fallen leaves beneath the trunks of the trees. Then it was on to painting the leaves. I used an acrylic ink, as Frankie recommended, to paint all of the leaves. Then I did a dry brushing for the highlights, and I don't love it, so we're gonna move on from that. Using a newly crafted formula of tan and brown grout, I made some dirt paths, which I sealed down with Mod Podge. Then, like a mad chemist, I began mixing up a brown that I thought was good enough for the trees, and then I slathered that all over them. More black Mod Podge to coat all the fallen leaves, followed by a black wash on the trunks of the trees, and then finally a light dry brushing. Next it was time to ink up the leaves. Oh wait, just kidding, I have to do the white undercoat. Everyone knows the green won't show through without that undercoat. Next it was the grass. I used 3 different kinds of fine turf to make this grass color, and I'm really pleased with the way that it looks. Sealed that down with some Mod Podge. Haha, I remembered this time. I glued down some little bushes for a bit of extra detail, and then sprinkled some highlight colors onto the leaves into the bushes to vary it up a little bit. And my favorite flower is lavender, so when I saw these little guys, I had to buy them. Throw one on there. Look at that. Bam! Really brings it all together right there. A little bit of color, a little bit of fun. And then when you weren't looking, I made this little backstop that I glued on. Sort of makes it look like the forest goes on forever. Then I jumped out of order a little bit and painted the edges black before I glued down the trees. And using tacky glue, I glued those suckers on. And with that, I'm ready to show you the final product. And there you have it, the Master Sword from A Link to the Past. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to subscribe. I'm going to be making some more stuff like this. Also, I promised that I would show my attempt at making a squirrel at the end of the video, so here's that. Be sure to leave a comment and let me know what you think about it. Anyways, thanks for watching. See you next time.